ever get that feeling, like when we're trying to wrap our heads around these massive, complicated problems, it's like we're not even using the right tools.
Yeah, I got you.
It's almost like that Richard Sylvan quote, pretty sharp observation, philosophers fiddle while the world begins to burn.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And that's kind of the feeling, this need for a fundamental shift in thinking that we're going to dive into today.
Right
We're
on.
going to be exploring the work of Richard Sylvan.
Yeah, fascinating guy, originally known as Routley.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting is he didn't just sort of point out this problem.
Right.
He was actually coming up with new intellectual tools to try and address it.
Yeah.
Born in 1935, died in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
This Australian philosopher made some really serious contributions to logic,
Okay.
metaphysics,
Uh-huh.
and ethics.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like a catalyst, really instrumental in starting up these major schools of thought.
Okay.
Empiric-consistent and relevant logic, Meinongian ontology, environmental ethics, all down in Australia.
So this radical project of philosophical reevaluation, what did that actually look like for Sylvan? What were the things that he felt needed to be challenged?
Well, a lot of it came down to his view that earlier thinkers had really mishandled or kind of messed up a lot of philosophical territory.
Okay.
And for him, this was tied to them having the wrong values.
Oh, okay.
So he really wanted to do this kind of philosophical restoration project, going back and looking at these areas that had been kind of pushed aside, right?
Yeah.
And showing that there were deeper connections and better ways of thinking about them.
Okay.
And I think what really ties a lot of his work together is this constant focus on meaning and value.
Okay.
Like he was really pushing for the legitimacy and importance of things that had often been ignored in philosophy.
And for our deep dive today, we are drawing on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on Richard Sylvan.
That's right.
So this is kind of our map of this expansive intellectual territory that he covered.
Exactly.
What's our aim today for you, the listener?
Well, we're going to try and pull out the most fascinating and relevant stuff from Sylvan's work.
Right.
And our hope is that, by looking at how he approached philosophy,
Right.
it might make you reconsider some of your own fundamental assumptions
Okay.
and maybe even open up completely new ways of understanding the world.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at some pretty out there ideas, theories that can have contradictions in them, objects that don't even exist, and the idea that value goes way beyond just human beings.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, it is.
And hopefully by the end, you'll have a really good sense of Sylvan's radical vision and maybe have a few aha moments along the way.
That'd be great.
So let's talk about Sylvan's approach in general. He wasn't exactly following the philosophical crowd, was he?
No, not at all. One of the things that really stands out about him is his willingness to really go to bat for ideas that most people had rejected. And Robert Meyer, another philosopher who worked with him, put it really well. He said, to get the counter-suggestible Sylvan to defend some view, one needed first to remark that the view was now utterly discredited.
Wow.
So it wasn't just about being contrary or argumentative.
Right.
There was a real deep conviction there that it was important to examine those ideas.
Okay.
And that's where this whole concept of philosophical rehabilitation comes in.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a catchy phrase for him.
Right.
It was like this core motivation.
Yeah.
He saw himself as kind of rebuilding these abandoned philosophical houses, the ones that he felt had been damaged by people with, bad values, essentially.
Yeah.
So he wanted to make these spaces livable again, by coming up with better ways to reason about them and by showing how they were connected.
Okay.
And you mentioned this focus on meaning and value. How did that play into everything for him?
Yeah.
If you look at the bigger picture, all of Sylvan's work, whether it's in logic or metaphysics or ethics, it's really trying to give recognition to things that had been pushed to the sidelines, the things that had been overlooked or dismissed.
Okay.
So let's start with logic, an area where he really made a big splash. It's more than just saying classical logic needs some tweaking. He was saying it's fundamentally wrong,
Yeah.
which is a pretty big claim. But he didn't just make the claim. He backed it up with really rigorous arguments and detailed logical systems. He was really arguing that non-classical logic was the way to go, and even entertained this idea called dialetheism.
Okay, dialetheism. So that's the idea that something can be both true and false at the same time.
Yes.
That's wild. What led him down that path?
I think a big part of it was his work on paradoxes, these statements that seem to contradict themselves.
Okay.
He focused on the paradoxes of self-reference, like the classic liar paradox. The statement is false. And the paradoxes of implication, which are about the connections between the if and then in conditional statements.
Right.
And this led him to become a key figure in the development of relevant logics,
Okay.
which stressed that there needs to be a real, meaningful connection between the parts of an implication.
Okay, and how does that tie in with paraconsistent logic? That was another area where he is a pioneer, right?
Exactly, because if you're really serious about relevance, about these meaningful connections,
Yeah.
it leads you pretty naturally to paraconsistent logic.
Huh?
And the Australasian school of paraconsistent logic, which Sylvan was key in starting, it's all about developing logics that can handle inconsistencies, contradictions, without everything just falling apart.
Okay, so it doesn't just mean that everything is true if you have a contradiction.
Right, exactly. It's a much more nuanced approach to how we deal with contradictions.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand this. So with paraconsistent logic, if there's a contradiction somewhere, it doesn't automatically mean the entire system collapses.
Exactly. You can still reason and make sense of things, even when there are inconsistencies.
So now let's talk about neutral quantification. That sounds very important, especially when you're talking about things that don't exist. How does that work?
Well, early on, when Sylvan was at Princeton, he realized that if you're going to talk about things like numbers or perfect vacuums in philosophy of science, or even fictional characters,
Right.
you need to be able to quantify over them, to say something about some of them or all of them.
Okay.
But the standard way of indicating existence in logic using the existential quantifier,
Right.
that kind of assumes existence.
Okay.
And he thought that was too much baggage.
So he came up with new symbols.
Exactly. He
Perfect.
introduced P for particular and U for universal.
Okay.
And these were meant to be neutral, so you could say things like some things do not exist
Okay.
without it immediately creating a contradiction.
Okay.
You could express that formally as px, not ex.
Mhm.
There's some x such that x does not exist, but without implying that a non-existent thing has to exist to be the subject of the claim.
Okay, so this allowed for talking about things that don't exist in a logical way.
Yeah, think about how often we talk about things that aren't physically present, like characters in a book or
Right.
mathematical concepts. Sylvan was trying to give us the tools to actually talk about those things in a rigorous way.
And this sparked some debates with David Lewis, another major figure in philosophy. What was the core of that disagreement?
Yeah, so Lewis, while recognizing that Sylvan was brilliant,
Right.
wondered if they weren't really talking past each other.
Huh.
Maybe it was more about terminology than a deep philosophical difference.
Okay.
He suggested you could kind of translate Sylvan's way of talking.
Mm.
So when Sylvan said, is an object, Lewis thought he really meant exists.
Right.
And when Sylvan said exists, he might have meant something more like is a concrete object.
Okay.
So the worry was that maybe Sylvan was just making a point about the word exists, when it came to abstract things.
Okay.
But even Lewis was careful not to push that interpretation too far. He admitted that there could be a real deeper disagreement there.
Okay.
So it wasn't just a simple matter of semantics.
Right. Let's move on to significance logic. That sounds like it was aimed at this trend in the early 20th century to just dismiss certain ideas as meaningless nonsense. What was Sylvan's take on that?
So what was going on was you had philosophers influenced by folks like Wittgenstein and the logical positivists
Right.
who were really quick to just label grammatically correct sentences as meaningless,
Okay.
and therefore not worth thinking about philosophically.
Right.
And Sylvan and Goddard, they were concerned that this was just a way of dodging real philosophical problems,
Like what?
like the paradoxes of self-reference or problems in set theory.
Okay.
So their answer to this was to develop this thing called significance logic.
Okay. And what was that all about?
Well, they had three main ideas.
Okay.
First, they said, look, there really are sentences that are grammatically correct but just don't make sense.
Right.
But unlike just pure gibberish, these sentences can actually be part of valid arguments.
Okay.
So, for example, someone might say, the number 5 is feeling blue.
Right.
Grammatically, it's fine, but it doesn't really have a truth value, does it?
No.
So their second point was that these kinds of sentences need a three-valued logic to really capture what's going on.
So more than just true and false.
Exactly. You need a way to represent nonsense or non-significance.
Okay.
And their third point was that all these significance logics need to have some kind of common context logic that tells you when something makes sense and when it doesn't.
Okay.
It's like the meaning of a sentence can depend on the situation.
So how did this three-valued logic work?
Well, they used weak, clean logic.
Okay.
And that had this third value and to represent non-significance.
Okay.
But the cool thing is that when you're dealing with regular true or false statements, it acts just like classical logic.
Okay.
But if any part of a sentence is non-significant, then so it's like a chain reaction of meaninglessness.
And all of this early work, it seems like it's kind of laying the groundwork for his more developed ideas on relevant and paraconsistent logic, especially with the Canterbury logic group. What were they trying to achieve there?
The Canberra Logic Group, with Sylvan as a leading figure, was really pushing for a more universal and powerful approach to logic.
Okay.
Sylvan had this vision of a universal semantics,
Yeah.
a way to express absolutely everything,
Okay.
and a universal logic, a logic that would apply in every situation.
Every situation.
Yeah, real, possible, even impossible, and inconsistent ones.
Wow.
He thought classical logic was way too limited to do that.
Okay.
He even wrote this kind of manifesto called Ultra-Logic as Universal,
Okay.
just to give you a sense of his ambition.
And this involved rethinking the very idea of implication, didn't it?
Absolutely.
What were the issues with how it was understood in classical logic?
Yeah, so it wasn't just about the idea of relevance, although that was important. He was really concerned with what he called absolute sufficiency.
Okay.
So for Sylvan, a genuine implication, if P then Q, should mean that P alone is enough to guarantee Q,
Okay.
without needing any extra assumptions or logical truths.
Okay.
He saw these paradoxes of material implication in classical logic as a failure to capture that idea.
What do you mean?
Well, for example, in classical logic, if 2 plus 2 will 5, then the moon is made of cheese.
Yeah.
That statement is considered true,
Okay.
but that seems totally wrong.
Right.
There's no connection there.
Okay, so how did this idea of expanding the set of worlds help with that?
Right, so Sylvan and others started to include not just logically possible worlds,
Okay.
but also what they called non-normal or impossible worlds.
Impossible worlds.
Yeah. And the idea was that to really test if P guarantees Q,
Yeah.
you need to consider all sorts of scenarios, even ones where basic logic might break down.
Okay.
So these impossible worlds let you create counterexamples to these weird implications.
I see. So you're kind of pushing the boundaries of logic to see what really holds true.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's like testing the limits of what's possible to really understand necessity.
Okay. And this led to paraconsistency because now you can have these worlds where contradictions are true.
Right.
So the logic doesn't just explode when you hit a contradiction.
Exactly. It's like a system that can still function even with a short circuit somewhere.
You mentioned Ratley-Meyer frame semantics. That sounds quite technical.
It is.
Can you give me a basic understanding of what that is?
So at a basic level, it sets up a structure with a bunch of worlds.
Okay.
Some normal, some not, a special actual world.
Okay.
And then a way of connecting these worlds together called the ternary relation R,
Okay.
and a way of handling negation called the Ratley star.
Okay.
And they defined when an implication or a negation is true
Right.
in terms of these components. But the key thing is that the Ratley star makes negation kind of indirect. So a statement A can be false at one world if its negation is true at a different world.
Okay.
And this allows for the possibility of both A and its negation being true at the same world,
Okay.
which is how you get inconsistency without triviality.
And this need for inconsistent worlds, was that what pushed Sylvan towards actually believing in true contradictions, dialetheism?
I think so. Initially, these impossible worlds might have been seen just as a theoretical tool.
Okay.
But the logic he was developing seemed to point to the possibility that some contradictions might actually be true in the real world.
Oh, okay.
So he developed this thing called dialectical logic
Okay.
and started working with Graham Priest to explore the implications of dialetheism.
Wow. So the idea is that reality itself might be more paradoxical than our normal logic allows for.
Oh, right. Exactly.
One place where this dialethic logic seemed to be useful was in naive set theory,
Yeah.
which had famously run into trouble with Russell's paradox. How did embracing contradiction help there?
Well, in naive set theory, which is based on this intuitive idea that you can have a set for any property,
Right.
Russell's paradox leads to a contradiction. This set is a member of itself, if and only if it is not.
Right.
But dialethetic logic gives you a way to accept that contradiction
Okay.
as a genuine truth rather than just a fatal flaw.
Okay.
So it becomes a proof of a true contradiction.
Okay.
And the challenge then is to develop the theory so it's still meaningful, not just trivial.
So it's not just saying that everything is true.
Exactly.
You still need some constraints.
Yeah, and Brady showed that this is actually possible,
Okay.
that you can have a non-trivial set theory even with true contradictions.
Sylvan also talked about associative logics, this idea that there should be meaningful connections in reasoning.
Yes, and for Sylvan, associative logics were about more than just preserving truth, right?
Okay.
They had to have this relevant, meaningful connection between the parts of an argument or an implication.
Okay.
Connexive logics, which include principles like Aristotle's thesis,
Okay.
which says that a statement can imply its own negation.
Right.
Those were even more radical because they often reject principles that are valid in classical logic.
I see. So it's about trying to capture those intuitive connections we see in reasoning.
Exactly.
His work on logic had so many implications for other areas of philosophy. You even mentioned confirmation theory and computation. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so in confirmation theory, Sylvan and Nolla argued that if you use relevant logic, you can actually avoid those weird paradoxes of confirmation. Like the Raven paradox, where seeing a white shoe supposedly confirms the statement that all ravens are black.
Right, that's bizarre.
Yeah, but with relevant logic, you can get rid of that.
Okay.
And in computation, he thought maybe dilithic logic could change the limits of what computers can do.
Okay.
Like maybe we could build dilithic machines that could go beyond what we think is possible.
Wow.
So he was thinking about the very foundations of computation in a really different way.
Okay, let's switch gears to ontology and metaphysics. Sylvan was very influenced by Meinong,
Yes.
but it seems like he had a sort of flipped perspective on the scope of these fields.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
Mm.
So Meinong saw his theory of objects as this very broad thing,
Okay.
encompassing logic, metaphysics, and what we now think of as ontology.
Right.
But Sylvan kind of reversed that.
Okay.
For him, ontology, which is the study of what exists and doesn't exist,
Okay.
and metaphysics, which is the study of the fundamental nature of reality,
Right.
those were the broader fields, and his theory of non-igism, which is kind of a neo-Meinongian view,
Okay.
that fit within them.
Okay, so non-anism, what's the main idea there?
Well, it's about non-existent objects.
Non-existent objects.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it all starts with Sylvan rejecting what he called the ontological assumption.
Okay, what's that?
The idea that you can't make true statements about things that don't exist.
Okay.
Sylvan thought that was wrong. He thought, to make sense of how we talk, about fictional characters,
Sure, yeah.
mathematical things,
Right.
even possibilities that never happen,
Okay.
we need to acknowledge that these non-existent things still have properties. So he called his theory non-tyism,
Non-deism.
and it was the theory of all items,
All right.
whether they exist or not.
Okay, so it's a way of talking about the whole range of things that we think about.
Exactly. Like, think about when you say Sherlock Holmes lived in Baker Street.
Right.
That seems true in some sense.
You're right.
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 Even though Sherlock Holmes isn't a real person,
Right.
non-tyism gives you a way to make sense of that.
And this was where Meinong came in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sylvan found in Meinong a framework for talking about all these items,
Okay.
whether they exist or not,
Right.
and without having to twist yourself into knots trying to explain it away.
Okay.
Meinong's theory let non-existent objects have properties, which Sylvan was totally on board with.
Okay.
He thought, of course you can say things like, Sherlock Holmes is a detective, without having to make Holmes exist in some weird way.
You mentioned that there are 5 main principles of minimal non-realism.
Yeah, it sounds more complicated than it is.
Okay.
The first one is basically just saying that everything is an object or an item.
Okay.
So whenever you talk about something, you're referring to an item in this big ontology.
Okay.
Doesn't matter if it exists or not.
Okay.
The second principle says that a lot of these items don't exist.
Okay.
And Sylvan, following Meinong, thought that existence was just a property.
Okay.
Some items have it, like Mount Everest.
Right.
Others don't, like the Golden Mountain.
Okay. But then there's this problem with Meinong's original theory, right?
Right.
The triviality problem.
Yeah.
If you can talk about the existing Sherlock Holmes, doesn't that mean he exists in some way?
Yeah, that was a big challenge. And Sylvan's solution was to introduce this distinction between characterizing properties and non-characterizing properties.
Yeah.
So characterizing properties are those that define what an object is.
Okay.
So for Sherlock Holmes, that would be things like being a detective, living in Baker Street, those sorts of things.
Okay.
Non-characterizing properties are everything else, including existence.
Okay.
So his fifth principle says that neither existence nor non-existence is a characterizing property.
Okay, I think I'm following this.
And this, together with his idea that for any consistent set of characterizing properties, there's got to be some item that has them, that's how he avoids the problem.
So the existing Sherlock Holmes still has the property of being a detective, but existing isn't part of what defines him.
Exactly.
Okay, so that lets you talk about the concept of an existing Sherlock Holmes without actually making him exist.
Right, exactly.
And Sylvan saw Nonachism as having a lot of applications.
Oh, yeah, tons.
Right.
He thought it was relevant to intentionality, how our thoughts are about things,
Okay.
the nature of non-existence,
Okay.
impossible objects. It's
Yeah.
like square circles, solving paradoxes, and also in the philosophy of mathematics.
Okay.
Perception, time, science fiction, you name it.
Okay, so he really saw this as a kind of fundamental shift in how we think about a lot of philosophical problems.
Yeah, he was trying to broaden the scope of what we consider in our theories.
But it sounds like he wasn't completely satisfied with non-Nanjiism as it was. He wanted to liberalize it.
Yeah. He even talked about moving toward modal Meinongianism. What was that about?
Yeah.
He had a couple reasons. One was that he thought his big book on Nanjianism, Exploring Meinong's Jungle and Beyond, was just too long.
Too long.
Yeah.
Okay.
And not punchy enough.
Okay.
He wanted something more streamlined.
Okay.
The other reason was that he wanted to be able to give items both characterizing and non-characterizing properties more freely.
Okay.
He thought the original framework was a bit too rigid.
I see.
So he was looking at ideas that were more in line with modal Meinongianism, which is a view that's been developed by folks like Graham Priest. And it basically looks at what properties things have in different possible worlds.
Okay, and then there's this thing called systology, which he developed later. How did that relate to non-systology?
Systology was kind of an extension of non-systology.
Okay.
It took the basic ideas, but tried to give a deeper account of what it means for something to be an item.
Okay.
So instead of just focusing on whether something exists or not,
Right.
he wanted to look at how items have standing, how they figure into our thinking and talking.
Okay.
And this was tied to his work on paraconsistent logic,
Okay, how so?
because he wanted to include inconsistent objects in this ontology, things like the square circle,
Right.
and to do that without everything becoming trivial.
Right. You need paraconsistency.
Exactly.
Okay.
He thought that inconsistent items were just part of what we think about, and our ontology should reflect that.
Okay, so he was expanding the catalog of things to consider.
Yeah, and it wasn't just inconsistent objects.
Right.
He also included things like vacancies, like empty spaces,
Yeah.
and holes, significant ideological objects, all sorts of things. He was trying to be really comprehensive.
Okay, so he was really broadening the scope of what we think of as existing or having standing or being an item.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned sources and the distinction between ordinary and non-ordinary predicates.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Sylvan realized that we get information about items from different sources, right? But not all sources are equally reliable.
Right, like if you see a mirage in the desert.
Exactly. So he distinguished between ordinary predicates,
Okay.
which describe how things appear to us,
Okay.
and non-ordinary predicates, which
Yep.
describe how they really are, independent of our perception.
Okay, so it's acknowledging that our view of things can be flawed.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that we need a deeper account of what's really there.
Okay.
So he's making us question how we know what we know.
Right. Now let's talk about pluralism with two L's. This is where Sylvan challenges the idea that there's only one actual world.
Yes, it's a very radical idea.
What's the core of that theory?
Sylvan argued against what he called one-worldism, the idea that there's only one real world.
Right.
Instead, he said there are many actual worlds.
Many actual worlds.
Yeah, a plurality.
Okay.
And his point was that there's no single world that has all the truths.
Okay.
No one set of facts that can't be changed.
Okay.
And no one correct scientific theory.
So it's a very different way of thinking about reality. How did he argue for this?
He had both indirect and direct arguments.
Okay.
Indirectly, he said, look, there aren't really good arguments for why there should be only one world.
Okay.
Directly, he argued that because there are many correct logics,
All right.
there must be many correct theories.
Okay.
And if those theories describe actual worlds, then there must be many actual worlds.
Okay.
And later on, he explicitly said that.